Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
That damn jacket. If I hadn't left it at home, everything might have played out differently. My 18-wheeler was fully loaded, ready for its 600-mile run, but my jacket was still hanging in my closet. The foreman wasn't pleased, but he grudgingly gave me a few extra minutes to swing by home and grab it. Frustrated, I cursed under my breath as the trailer wheels clipped the curb while I turned into my narrow street. The brakes hissed as I came to a stop outside my house. Odd, I thought. That looks like my boss's car in the driveway. Leaving the truck idling, I rushed inside, heading straight for the bedroom. As I opened the door, the lights were on, and there she was, my wife, on her hands and knees. And there was my boss, pounding away without a care. She hadn't even noticed me, but he sure did. He froze for just a second, guilt flashing across his face. Then, with a smug grin, he resumed, unfazed. I reached into the wardrobe, my hands shaking with fury, grabbed my forgotten jacket, and shouted at the two of them, "I'll see you later." I stormed out, rage pulsing through me, slamming the bedroom door behind me, then the front door even harder. I clambered back into my car, barely able to control the anger as I barreled down the narrow suburban street. Once I hit the freeway, the truck roared to life, charging through the night toward my destination. The anger still burned inside, but at least I had control over the trembling that had overtaken me when I'd stumbled out of the house. Home. I didn't even know if I had a home anymore. My mind was racing, trying to process everything, when suddenly the front wheels hit a bump in the road. The truck veered wildly to the left, and before I could react, my last memory was the massive tree trunk looming in front of the windshield. "I think he's waking up," said a female voice in the distance. I tried in vain to open my eyes. My arms would not move and I couldn't feel my legs. Another voice, closer to me, whispered, "Thank God." It was a voice I recognized immediately. My wife, Kathy. Other voices joined in, and I could feel hands touching my face. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. Nice to have you with us again. How are you feeling?" An authoritative male voice boomed out. I tried to speak, but could not form any words. With intense effort, I was finally able to open my eyes. My surroundings were brightly lit. I made out several shapes moving around the room without being able to identify them. "Mr. Reynolds," the male voice boomed out again. "Blink your eyes if you can hear me." I blinked. Good. Good. "Mr. Reynolds, you have had an accident, and you are in a hospital. Do not try to move. You have several broken bones, and we've had you in an induced coma for 14 days while we tried to get you stabilized. Do you understand?" "Yeah, I get it," I thought. I blinked again. "Okay, now we have to get to work to get you on your feet again. It will take some time, but we will get you better." I felt very tired and groggy, closed my eyes and nodded off into dream world again. When I opened my eyes again, who knows how much later, I was able to see clearly. I surveyed my surroundings. Various tubes penetrated my anatomy, but I found I could turn my head a little to the side, which allowed me to see that I had company. My wife sat in a chair in the corner of the room, reading a book. She sensed rather than saw my movement and immediately dropped the book and hurried to my bedside. "Oh, Mark," she started. "I'm so glad you're awake again. I thought we'd lost you. How do you feel?" What a dumb question, I thought. How on earth was I expected to feel after weeks in a coma and unable to get up and walk? I was spared a reply, though. I tried but still couldn't speak. She gently touched my forehead and returned to her seat, wearing an expression I could not understand. Compassion? Anger? Sympathy? Guilt? I steadily returned her gaze until finally she broke eye contact and looked away. Yes, no doubt about it. It was a guilty face that had me under surveillance. I struggled to clear my mind. The tree my truck slammed into flashed through my consciousness. Did I slam the front door and run from the house? Why? The concentration was too much and I let myself drift away again, no doubt helped by morphine, or whatever they were using to control my pain. It was dark when I awoke again, and the chair in the corner had been replaced by a makeshift cot. Kathy was curled up, sound asleep, with a thin hospital coverlet over her body. I let my mind wander. Slowly my thoughts crystallized. I remembered collecting my truck from the depot and finding my jacket was still at home. I remembered bursting through the door of my bedroom to see my darling wife on her hands and knees with my company boss pounding into her doggy fashion. Everything started to fall into place. I tried to speak. "You bitch." I wanted to scream. What came out of my mouth was little more than a gurgle, but it was enough to wake Kathy, who scampered out of her cot and rushed to my side. I flinched when she tried to touch my face, trying to turn away. I hoped my eyes conveyed the anger I felt. For days, the doctors kept me drugged up to control pain. I found that in addition to breaking both legs, I had sustained a back injury which was not yet fully investigated. The truck I was driving was a complete write-off, but I was lucky that a car following me had reported my crash immediately when it happened, and an ambulance was on site within moments. Doctors began explaining the extent of my injuries and detailing my rehabilitation program. Throughout all this, the constant in my room was my darling 304 wife, Kathy. My voice returned. What I should say to my wife. One of the nursing staff, during a rare moment when Kathy slipped out to use the bathroom, observed that she had never seen a more loving wife. Kathy had arrived soon after I was admitted and had refused to leave my side since. I did not disillusion her. When Kathy returned and the nurse had gone, I decided to ask for some answers. How long, Kathy? She turned to me in surprise. They think you fell asleep at the wheel, she ventured cautiously. Your recovery is expected to take several months. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I shot back. I definitely did not fall asleep at the wheel, but something caused my truck to veer off the road. Now, what about you and my boss? How long have you been screwing him behind my back? Mark, I really don't want to talk about him right now. I love you, only you, and I'm devoting myself to helping you recover from this awful accident. Well, you may think me ungrateful for saying so, but the last time I saw the two of you, it certainly didn't look like you were in love with me. On reflection, it also occurs to me that this time was not the first time you two have been together, right? She didn't have to answer. The guilt was plainly visible in her face as she looked down at the floor to avoid my scrutiny. So, my faithless Kathy, how long? Mark, I really don't want to talk about it. Do you want a divorce then? Oh, God no, Mark. Please believe me when I say I love you, and only you. I want to bear your children. I want to grow old with you. That is most unlikely now, Kathy. You crapped all over our wedding vows. Remember the ones where we promised to be true to each other? Until death do us part? Well, I'm truly sorry to disappoint you by surviving the crash, but it seems that you couldn't wait until my demise in any case, so the chances of us living together in harmony for the rest of our lives is fairly unlikely, don't you think? She flinched from my vitriolic outburst and fell back into her chair, sobbing quietly, hands covering her face. I think you should go home, Kathy. You will probably think me ungrateful for not appreciating your dedication, but each time I look at you, all I can see is my boss defiling you. She sobbed louder, grabbed her little overnight case, and stumbled from my room into the hospital corridor. I was alone and felt miserable. When a nurse came by, she immediately commented on my wife's absence. I decided not to comment, but asked her to contact my work foreman to tell him I could see visitors. He turned up less than an hour later. I've seen the truck, Mark. You're a lucky guy. I can't believe that you got out of there alive. Yeah, well, thanks for coming down, Dean. I've been replaying the crash in my head for a few days now. Even though my memory of the event is a bit hazy, something on that truck broke. It was uncontrollable, Dean. The wheel got wrenched out of my hands, and the whole damn rig just speared off the road after it hit a bit of a bump. Have they checked the rig yet? Now, the word is that you fell asleep. Dean, go and talk to the workshop foreman, will you please? Ask him to look at the wreck and see what he can find that might have forced me to run off the road. I could see he wasn't really convinced, but Dean agreed to talk to the workshop guy. We talked about other things when finally, he faced the elephant in the room. I thought Kathy might be with you. Has she been in? He ventured cautiously. Just left. Why do you ask? No reason, Mark. Just thought she would be here, that's all. He shuffled his feet uncomfortably before making his excuses and leaving. It occurred to me that Kathy's dalliance with the boss might not be as well hidden as she believed. The following day, I had a visit from two workmates. One was Frank Lambert, the workshop foreman, and with him was the union rep, a dour Scot called Roy McGregor. Neither looked particularly happy. Mac took the lead. Mark, we have a problem. I brought Frank with me to explain, but your accident was inevitable, and I have already started the ball rolling to have every tractor in the whole fleet checked and cleared before starting its next run. Management is furious because many deliveries will be late, and some customers have already said they'll use other carriers if we let them down. Have a look at the workshop log for your rig, Mark. Frank dutifully handed over the greasy hardcover logbook for the tractor I wrecked. On the last page, completed the day of my accident, was an underlined notation about a broken spring on the front axle. Go back to the previous page. I flipped the page, and between comments about uneven tire, where was an almost identical notation about a broken spring leaf. The page before that carried the same comment. I went back 3 weeks and noticed that the broken spring was mentioned every time the truck was serviced. Jesus, Frank, why didn't you replace the bloody thing? I fumed. Management wouldn't let me hold the truck up. I had a replacement sitting in the workshop 2 weeks ago, but they would not allow me to take the rig off the road because they were too busy. It was always going to be fixed at the next service, and nobody thought I should be told about this? I'm sorry, Mark. The boss was so certain that it was only a minor issue that it never occurred to me until the crash. I'm so sorry. It is really my fault that you're all busted up. Bullshit, muttered Mac. The bastards knew the risk and played Russian roulette with your life. I contacted our legal people today, and they've appointed Evan Harper to take your case. He already has copies of the logbook entries and has statements from other drivers. This guy's a real shark, Mark. We have to fight on two fronts. Firstly, you need to be compensated for your medical expenses, rehabilitation, and loss of wages, and secondly, you need a compensation package to counter the fact that due to your back injury, it is unlikely that you'll ever drive for a living again. Mac's blunt statement rocked me to the core. I had not even considered the possibility of not being able to return to the job. I lay back in my bed and closed my eyes. Don't worry, Mark. You need to get better and get out of here to get on with life. We'll stand by you. As I looked at their backs, retreating from my hospital room, a tear trickled down my cheek. I guess I had a right to feel dejected. In the space of a few weeks, I had crashed my truck, lain in a coma for weeks, and now had to confront the reality that not only had I lost my wife, but I had also lost my job. Evan Harper bounced into my room the following day. He was an imposing figure, probably in his early 40s, well over 6 feet tall, and with a physique suggesting he might well be a pro basketballer. We reviewed the crash, workshop reports, and finally addressed future options. You completed 2 years of a business degree, he noted. What the hell prompted you to give that away and turn to driving trucks for a living? I smiled. My old man was a long-haul truck driver and often took me with him during my school years, so it was not as drastic a move as it might have appeared to you. There is another reason. I met a gorgeous girl, and we could not wait to get married. Before you ask, no, she was not pregnant. We were very much in love, and the change in career choice let us get together. Lovely story, Mark, but I'm hearing that all might not be well between you two. Jesus, am I the only person in the state who didn't know my wife was playing up with my boss? With your boss? Evan repeated incredulously. I'm going to enjoy carving him up in court. I don't really care about him anymore, but I want you to prepare divorce papers as soon as you can. We don't usually handle divorces, but I'm happy to make an exception here. Evan was great. In the short time we had been together, I developed a sense of trust in this man. He was compassionate, energetic, and displayed a sense of integrity that gave me hope and comfort. He carefully explained his strategy in my action against my employers and promised to provide some expert advice regarding the handling of my split from Kathy. For the first time since the crash, I began to feel some level of optimism. Several days went by, during which time I began recovery therapy and doctors were able to examine CAT scans to work out a treatment plan for my back, which was giving me plenty of pain. When an unannounced visitor entered the room and asked me to confirm my identity, my senses were immediately on full alert. He handed me a small envelope and might have been about to ask for a signature when he noted the number of tubes attached to my anatomy and thought better of it. Good day, sir, he mumbled as he shuffled through the door and back to obscurity. I called in a nurse to open the envelope and read me its contents. She obliged, but paled when she started reading. It's a dismissal notice from your company, she whispered. How could they do this to you while you're still in the hospital? I asked her to phone Evan for me and to read him the letter. Predictably, he was by my side within minutes, fuming about cold-hearted bastardry. This will be the most expensive letter this a-hole has ever written, he promised. It effectively means we don't have to argue in court that you cannot continue in your chosen career. He's done it for us. His cold and calculating action towards an employee in hospital while recovering from a work-related accident will also not earn him any favors in court. What began as just another day on the recovery trail turned from despair to optimism. Evan definitely had an innate ability to make me feel positive about the future. By the way, he said over his shoulder as he left, your wife was served with divorce papers today. Kathy had not been to see me since she left in tears, but arrived in my room just after dinner with smoke billowing from both ears. How could you do this to me? She wailed. I don't want a divorce. I made a mistake, Mark, a mistake. But I love you, and I want us to stay together and work it out. I was much better prepared for this confrontation. You have a strange way of showing your love for me, Kathy. It was bad enough that I had to see firsthand what you did to our marriage, but it seems that I was the only person in the entire state who did not know what was going on. It's quite clear now that every time I started a long-haul trip, it was the starting signal for the next get-together with my boss. I asked you earlier how long you two have been screwing, and you avoided the question. It doesn't matter anymore, Kathy. You have disrespected me and our wedding vows repeatedly. Have I ever denied you, Mark? Is that your justification? I asked incredulously. Seriously, Kathy, I thought you could do better than that. How many times have you two been together since my crash, Kathy? She lowered her eyes and went silent. If the answer had been none, could we still have had a chance? I wondered. We've had a good marriage until now, I pointed out. Let's not destroy our good memories by getting angry and telling lies. We will need to talk about who gets what at some time, but now is not the time. Go home, Kathy. If he makes you happy, sign the petition for divorce and go to him. Please do not look to me as your life partner anymore. I cannot look at you without reliving that horrible moment I saw you with him. There is no way back after that. Goodbye, Kathy. Have a wonderful life. Once again, she left my hospital room in tears. This time, I hoped it was for good. My limbs healed first. With plaster casts in place, I hobbled around the ward and endured therapy sessions several times a day. The injury to my back was worse. It was decided by my medical team that the best option was to stabilize it with metal plates, effectively fusing several vertebrae. The operation was delicate and lasted many hours. Recovery was worse. I endured constant pain right up to the day I was finally discharged from hospital, struggling through each day on a cocktail of painkiller drugs. Evan Harper, meanwhile, had been on the warpath. He sued the transport company for everything he could find in the statutes. His hopes of settlement before trial were dashed, and I found myself in the courtroom gallery on the first day, sitting while Evan outlined his case to a judge. By the end of the day, witnesses had given evidence which all but buried the company's defense, and before the start of the second day, Evan was approached by the company's solicitors in an effort to settle out of court. "I'm going for the jugular," he said joyfully as we entered the meeting room. "The bastards have lost, and they know it. All they're trying to do now is to mitigate the amount of damage." True to his word, Evan threw down the gauntlet, demanding at least $10 million in damages and compensation. He pointed out that I faced ongoing medical costs, a lifetime with debilitating back pain, and retraining for an alternate career with no guarantees of success. Hell, he was so convincing that even I felt sorry for me. The deal needed to be concluded before the court reconvened at 11 a.m., a factor that worked in our favor. When the defense countered with $5 million, Evan scowled outwardly, and I knew he was holding back a resounding gotcha within, knowing that we would in all probability settle at the midway point when his original aim was $5 million, the amount of their starting point. In the end, he won out, bullying them relentlessly until the two parties finally agreed on $8.5 million. I heaved a sigh of relief. It was the first time I had seen my boss since well before the accident, and I noted with some satisfaction that he was shaking with rage at being forced into this position, and also that he was not able to look me in the eye. With the legal fees out of the way, I paid a visit to the depot one final time to bid goodbye to my workmates. Frank, whose fastidious records had proved the company's negligence, and Roy, who had pushed relentlessly for my fair treatment. It was time for me to regroup and plan for the future. I decided to relocate to my parents' hometown, where I had studied some years before, and to resume my studies in the hope of getting work in an administrative position. I bought a 2-bedroom apartment near the university and a small hatchback to get around. Going back to school was an interesting experience. For a start, I was a decade older than most of the students in my group. I was also much better motivated. I really wanted to succeed. My parents loved the new arrangement. I visited every weekend, took Dad to the football games or to the bay for fishing, occasionally, and the three of us regularly enjoyed a restaurant meal together. Kathy had not signed the divorce papers but seemed to be paying the mortgage and the utilities, so I let it slide, not wanting any disharmony in my life. On the advice of Evan Harper, I let him organize a security agency to place several security cameras in our house. Until our divorce, he felt it was wise to keep an eye on the premises without the need to physically keep calling there. A couple of years later, I graduated with honors. The hunt for a good long-term job took me to an accounting firm in the city center, which specialized in the management of corporate bankruptcies. Their work was largely creative. Their primary objective was not to force a struggling business into bankruptcy, but to review its operations to try and return them to profitability. Sometimes, this was achieved by creditors making a sacrifice. It was work I loved. I was part of a small team of experienced operators, doing forensic examinations of a variety of companies to find out where they had gone wrong, and then to try to work with their key people to figure out the best way to turn things around. It was quickly recognized that I had a real talent for spotting a leak in a corporation's business and then designing a fix to plug it effectively. At the end-of-year staff function, my work was recognized by both the partners and my peers, and I was given my own group to lead, together with a substantial increase in salary. When a new assignment landed on my desk one morning, I nearly choked. The company facing bankruptcy proceedings was none other than my old employer. Recognizing the possible conflict of interest, I immediately phoned the senior partner and asked him to excuse me from the case. He was blunt. "Mark, we are well aware of your previous association with this company, which makes you the perfect fit. No doubt you have former workmates who still rely on the business for their livelihood, which give you an extra incentive to pull them out of the mire. Furthermore, I trust your professionalism." The first job was to phone my old boss and let him know that my firm had been appointed and that I would be leading the management team. He raved on for a while about the unfairness of it all, that there was no real problem, just a minor cash flow issue that had already been overcome, and that our intervention would be a total waste of time. I delicately pointed out that the intervention was ordered by the courts, that our team had been appointed to investigate, and that I would arrive with my team at 9 o'clock the next morning. I thanked him in anticipation of his cooperation and hung up. It was blindingly obvious only minutes after our arrival that the staff had been briefed to tell my team as little as possible, for they obstructed us at every possible opportunity. This was not an unusual reaction from management. After all, we represented the symbol of their failure to run their own business. I met briefly with Roy and Frank over a cup of coffee during the morning and came to a decision at lunchtime. After a group discussion with my own people, knocking on the boss's door, I let myself in and suggested that things might be less uncomfortable if he vacated the premises to leave me and my team to do our work. He rejected the notion outright, at first, but when I pointed out that I could ask for his forcible removal, he relented and skulked off like a spoiled schoolboy. I took 2 days to find the problem. The youngest member of the team, a tiny blonde in pigtails who looked no more than 16 years of age and was fresh out of commercial school, came to me with a creditor's ledger. This operator works for the company and is paid regularly for long-haul trips around the state. I've looked, but I can't find the same truck on any of the freight manifests. So what work is it doing and who is being charged for it? After thanking her for her powers of observation, I asked for copies of the invoices. Phantom operators are one of the oldest tricks in the book for transport operators who use subcontract vehicles, and they are usually spotted when a particular member of the accounting staff goes for years without taking any leave as they try desperately to keep covering their tracks. There was no such situation here. Leafing through the invoices, it quickly became obvious that everyone, without exception, was authorized by the boss himself. Calling in the administration manager, I asked him whether the company supplied the boss with a laptop. Of course, he beamed, happy to be able to contribute. "We bought 4 Dell laptops about a year ago, and the boss has the top of the range of those. I have the invoice if you would like to see it." I smiled inwardly and noted the serial number of the computer held by the boss. My next move was to phone the local sheriff and ask for some help. I need to collect a piece of company equipment held by a manager at his residence, and I have a feeling he will be reluctant to part with it. I believe that the laptop contains information that is vital to our investigation into his company. He was far from enthusiastic, but agreed to pick me up from the depot office in 15 minutes. On our drive there, his interrogation began. "You used to work for this mob, didn't you?" "Huh." I agreed. "Had a bad accident, as I recall. I had to arrange the recovery of the wreck." "You were lucky to survive it, son." "Yes, indeed I was. But things have a habit of turning out right in the end." "Left your wife behind when you moved out?" "Yes," I murmured reflectively. "Is that bastard still banging her?" "Wouldn't know, Sheriff. I filed for divorce when I left. It's never been finalized, but I have no love interest right now, and I really don't care who she sleeps with at night." "Oh, I think she sleeps alone at night. Her company arrives during the day. He is married with kids and is home every night. His poor wife is probably the only person in town who doesn't know what's going on." "Well, that would make 2 of us," I observed acidly. I had no idea either, until I stumbled in on the pair of them in the act. That was the day I had the crash. We agreed that the sheriff would let me make the request for the laptop and that he would intervene only if necessary. It was necessary, of course. At first, he tried to palm off a laptop which was older and a different make. But when he realized that I had the make and serial number of the unit we sought and saw the sheriff emerge from the squad car, he reluctantly handed it over, promising me that it would be back in his possession within 24 hours. Knowing he was probably right, I asked the sheriff to drop me back at the office and I pulled my team together. One was delegated to begin to download the entire contents of the laptop onto our secure server. This way, if the boss's lawyers arrived with a court order for the return of the unit, we could hand it back, complete with a hidden auto-forward function to allow us to monitor any further traffic that might be sent after its return. As predicted, a fresh-faced lawyer, probably in his first year, arrived to demand the immediate return of his client's laptop. We blustered a little to point out that the laptop in question was, in fact, the property of the company and not his client, but then begrudgingly acknowledged that he was fully authorized to retain possession. The laptop had been returned to its carry case before the lawyer's arrival, so that to a casual observer it appeared not to have been touched by me or my people. The kid triumphantly took possession and literally skipped back to his car. My IT people, meanwhile, were assessing the downloaded contents of the laptop. Their job was made considerably easier by the fact that there were very few passwords used and access to all areas proved remarkably simple. We zeroed in on bank records and found a trail of transactions dating back several years, but slowly escalating in both amount and frequency. It was clear that our target was siphoning off large sums of money using bogus invoices which cleared the system only because he approved them. Our next task was to follow the money trail. Payments initially went to a bank account in the name of the phantom contractor, controlled, of course, by the company boss. The account only held a small balance, making it obvious that funds were being transferred elsewhere to avoid detection. By following codes from the downloaded files, we were able to find some of the accounts into which money had been hidden. They were scattered in various countries around the world in a variety of names. It was time to call in Evan Harper, the lawyer who had won me my compensation case. He was still working in the same firm and had made partner status since our last meeting. He seemed pleased to see me and was almost salivating at the prospect of taking on a case against my old boss. Several days of intense meetings with the corporate affairs regulator and police agencies led us to the decision to have police lay embezzlement charges immediately and to apply for immediate incarceration without bail to avoid the possibility of the defendant fleeing from the country. The day Henry Caldwell was arrested, I had a visitor at the transport company office. "There's a Mrs. Caldwell at the reception desk to see you, Mark," the young receptionist announced. "Fine, send her in." This was going to be interesting, I thought. The woman who entered my temporary office, actually the boss's office which I had commandeered in his absence, was a stunner. Blonde, built, beautifully dressed, and sensuously elegant. She offered me her hand and after a surprisingly firm handshake, gracefully reclined in a visitor's chair in front of the desk. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Henry Caldwell's wife." "Yes, I rather gathered that. What can I do for you, Mrs. Caldwell?" "I understand that you are responsible for putting my husband in prison." "That might be a bit strong, Mrs. Caldwell. We have proof that your husband has siphoned huge sums of money out of his own company, illegally, placing its future in jeopardy. The law considers him a flight risk and has placed him in detention pending his trial. So, effectively, Mrs. Caldwell, it is your husband who has put himself in prison, not me." "What do you know about the company's ownership, Mr. Reynolds?" "Only what is contained in the corporate register. There are 2 shares, only, held separately by you and your husband. But you know this. Why ask the question?" "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sure if I mentioned my maiden name, you would recognize my family immediately. We bought this company in its infancy and have invested heavily in equipment to allow it to grow. There are, as you have observed, 2 shares, but the entire financing of the company has been through my family, secured by a series of loans. If the company fails, my husband loses 1 share that was initially gifted to him. He showed early in the company's growth that he was a capable manager, and I believe that he still is." The waters were being muddied. We were aware from our initial examination of the company's structure that a large number of loans had originated from a single investor, but had not made the connection to Caldwell's wife. "Mrs. Caldwell," I sighed, "without wanting to disrespect your husband, I can tell you that our research suggests that he has been less than forthright with you, a fact which the court will consider in the next couple of weeks. We have taken legal action, already, to prevent him from accessing any area of the company's activities, and have also worked with the staff to give them confidence that in all likelihood, the organization will trade its way out of its current financial position. All of our investigation leads us to the conclusion that it should be operating profitably and that its parlous state is the direct result of some illegal activities which I am not at liberty to discuss with you. I can give my assurance, though, that we will not leave this place until we are satisfied that either its future is secure or that we have to close the doors and sell off the assets." The elegant lady nodded, stood up and smoothing down her pencil skirt, thanked me, and with a sway of her hips, left the office, leaving behind a trace of the smell of her perfume. By the time the court case was convened, we had all our ducks in a row. We knew not only how Caldwell had been able to move funds with a phantom contractor, but precisely where those funds were transferred and when. We were curious about his motivation, for none of the embezzled funds appeared to have been spent. Our lawyer, Evan Harper, cut him to pieces in the courtroom. Caldwell began with a strategy of evading direct questions, clearly unaware of just how much information had been gathered. He was also unaware of another piece of information: Evan Harper's security cameras. Evan had not mentioned them since they were installed. When Caldwell was placed on the witness stand again, he was reeling from trying to answer a barrage of financial questions when Harper suddenly changed tack. "Mr. Caldwell," he began innocently, "do you know a Mrs. Kathy Reynolds?"
Yes.
He paled visibly. "Can you describe your relationship with Mrs. Reynolds, please?" "Certainly. She is the wife of one of my former drivers. We met occasionally at company parties. Is there anything further you would like to tell the court about your relationship with Mrs. Reynolds?" He was unsettled and becoming exasperated as Evan Harper continued to push him off balance. "I have no relationship with Mrs. Reynolds. I told you. She is the wife of an ex-driver, and he is also leading the team investigating my company at the moment. Have you ever had sexual relations with Mrs. Reynolds?" "Good Lord, no," he responded immediately. "Your Honor, I would like to release this witness for recall later and call Mr. Andrew Brooks to the stand." Granted, a beefy character about 40 years of age and carrying a little more weight than he should, sauntered to the witness stand and was duly sworn in. "Mr. Brooks, would you tell the court your full name and occupation, please?" "Andrew Brooks, and I am a security consultant with ABC Security. Would you tell the court, please, what I instructed you to do on the April 19th 2 years ago?" "I installed 5 security cameras in the residence owned by Mr. and Mrs. Mark Reynolds." "Are those cameras still active, Mr. Brooks?" "Yes, sir. Their content is transferred to our servers automatically every 24 hours. "Who monitors those surveillance files, Mr. Brooks?" "Why, until yesterday when you asked to see them, nobody ever looked at them. I'm going to show you 5 photographs, with the court's permission." "Is permission granted?" The judge nodded his approval, and Harper theatrically handed the first photo to the witness, who perused it but maintained a stony facade. "Would you please identify the people in this photograph, and if you can, the location where the photograph was taken?" "Certainly. The man in the photo is the defendant, Henry Caldwell. I do not know the woman in the photograph, but she is sitting over there in the gallery." He pointed out Kathy, who by now was trying to shrink under her seat. "Would you describe to the court what the people in the photograph were doing at the time?" How do I say this? They were having sex. They were engaged in sexual intercourse?" "Yes, sir, they were." "Your Honor, I have a further 4 photographs, taken separately over several recent weeks via the security cameras in the home, which I now submit to the court as evidence. I also have an affidavit sworn by Mr. Brooks, confirming the legitimacy of the photos and the placement of security cameras." "Your Honor, I would like to recall Mr. Caldwell to the stand." The a-hole was beaten, and he knew it. He looked down at the floor during further questions and was forced to admit perjury. When Caldwell was finally stood down, the court was adjourned to the following day. The judge got straight down to business when the court opened next day, finding Caldwell guilty on embezzlement charges totaling millions of dollars and perjury, noting that he could also have faced charges for his inappropriate relationship with an employee's wife. His sentencing was deferred for several weeks, leaving us well satisfied with the result of our endeavors. Most of the funds were recoverable, now that we had information on the overseas financial institutions and account numbers. It was a true delight to meet with Dean, Frank, Roy, and all the senior staff at the transport terminal and give them an assurance that the missing funds had been located, overdue debts settled, and a release from the courts to allow them to trade normally again. Dean was a shoo-in for the CEO's job, and with his loyal staff behind him, would have the company humming again in no time. Ownership was now firmly held by Caldwell's wife, who, as it turned out, had been most supportive while they were struggling. It was at a dinner with Evan Harper a few days later that we were approached at our table by Kathy. I stood as she approached and invited her to join us. Since we had barely finished placing our order, I flagged a waiter and invited Kathy to order a drink and a meal. She was clearly embarrassed to be with us. Evan Harper seemed less than pleased with her presence, too. "I'm sorry to invade your privacy like this," she began. "But when I discovered that you had booked a dinner here, I decided that the opportunity to speak was well overdue and, well, here I am." "What's on your mind, Kathy?" "You must know by now that Henry and I intended to leave the country together and live together overseas. Henry kept hinting that he would soon be in a position to finance our life together, but never revealed how. I was shocked when the company was put into receivership because I thought it was doing so well, and even more shocked in the courtroom to discover that my lover— I'm sorry, Mark, but he has been my lover for many years— was planning to finance our life together by stealing from his own company. This is hardly the time or place for us to have a heart-to-heart chat about things," I started, gesturing towards an embarrassed Evan Harper. Perhaps we could have this conversation at another time. No conversation necessary, Mark. I was a fool to throw your love away so carelessly, and an even bigger fool to think it was serious when I knew all along that Henry was still sleeping with his wife. I doubt that in his mind I was ever anything more than a dirty secret when we first started getting together when you were out of town, but little by little I let him get to me and I convinced myself that I was in love with him. Clearly, given the amount of money he managed to stash away over the last couple of years, he felt something for me, too. But that's not why I'm here. You served me with divorce papers some years ago, Mark, and I finally have to accept that there is no chance of our marriage surviving. Rummaging around in her handbag, she produced a crumpled sheet of paper. The divorce petition, Mark, signed without restriction. You're officially free of me. We'll need to talk about the house, but I want no further claim on you, since it was me who trashed our relationship in the first place. Thank you for the offer of dinner, but suddenly I'm not so hungry anymore. Good night. She stood quickly, trying to hide the tears that had formed, and disappeared in a rush. Well, that was a bit unexpected. I smiled at Evan Harper. Now maybe we can enjoy our dinner. The court was reconvened for the sentencing hearing about a month later, so Evan Harper and I decided to attend. To our surprise, Kathy was in the gallery too, dressed conservatively in a business suit and looking $1,000,000. Sentencing was brief. The judge droned through the charges and the guilty verdicts and piled years of jail time upon years of jail time for each. The final tally was somewhere over 20 years, but Caldwell would be eligible for parole, given time served to date, in 9 years and 7 months. He looked up and met my gaze, and seeing the relieved smile on my face, mouthed something that might have been "screw you," but I was content. The scheming bastard who stole my wife while I was earning his living by driving trucks all over the country now had his comeuppance. He had lost the money he salted away, lost his wife, his company, and his lover, all in the space of 3 months. I gave him my cheeriest smile as he was led away to serve his time, and for the first time noticed Caldwell's soon-to-be ex-wife in the gallery. She smiled my way, and we met near the exit on our way out. "Take a girl to lunch," she volunteered. 2 steps behind her, listening to every word, stood my ex-wife Kathy. "Love to." I beamed. Kathy spluttered and quickly turned away. The lady took my offered arm, and we strolled sedately to a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. After years of pain, humiliation, and frustration, I finally looked forward to what the future might hold. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.